So welcome everyone to our first meeting with the Sanctuary City Project. We've got Chris here today. I'm going to really toss it to you to begin with introducing your project, Sanctuary City Project, design thinking, and then we'll also move on to talking a little bit about secondary research towards the end of our time together. My students and Catherine, your students are more than welcome to stick around. At the end, I'm going to talk about a little bit about the secondary research expectations I have and how to use the Freel library to access some of those resources and what I expect to see as part of your homework for next week. So we'll do that at the end of our time together.
And Melanie, your class is a 75-minute class or it's longer?
Well, I think we're probably going to go for, Chris, you're probably going to go for about 45 minutes or so, like ish.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, like 40 minutes or so, yeah.
Yeah, and then we'll have some time for some questions, and then we'll follow that with my stuff. So yeah, so about
Perfect.
70, yeah.
Perfect. We may split off and go touch base when you split off, Melanie.
Right, and one other thing I totally forgot, I am going to record this, so I forgot to start. I'm going to start recording it right now. All right.
Great.
I'll hand it to you.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, it's kind of weird not seeing any students, only seeing a couple different people, but I'll get used to that fast. Can everybody hear me all right? Good sound? I'm speaking loud enough? Yes, okay. Yeah, so as Melanie said, my name's Chris Treggiari. I'm an artist working in Oakland, California, in the Bay Area. And I've been working on the Sanctuary City Project with Sergio De La Torre, who can't be here today. He'll be here for the next 3 sessions, but for today, he's teaching another class right now, so he can't be here. But Sergio and I have been working on the Sanctuary City Project since 2008. So approximately 12 years, we've been working on this in different iterations with community. My background is I went to Rhode Island School of Design on the East Coast, graduated with my BFA there, and then I got my MFA at San Francisco Art Institute in 2009 and been a practicing artist for the last 11 years, and before that as well, but after grad school. Dabbling in social practice, community-based practice. You know, socially engaged art is an artist working deeply in community, working with people, working on themes or issues within a community that could be worked together, not only with myself, but with other people, with community in mind. I'll say community Sanctuary City Project. So Sanctuary City Project came about in 2008, as I said. A sanctuary city is a city that does not necessarily comply with federal ICE immigration authority. They do not comply with federal government in terms of deportation orders or raids or things like that. You'll be hearing a lot about, or you have been hearing a lot about sanctuary cities right now because of our President Donald Trump, and before that in different administrations as well. Sanctuary cities started up approximately around 1989. They started off with 13 cities. And San Francisco, where Sergio and I were living at the time, was one of the first 13 cities to be a sanctuary city. So approximately now, there are about 250 different jurisdictions or cities that have sanctuary city ordinances. And I say ordinance, it's not a law, it's an ordinance. And what that means is different cities can interpret how they become a sanctuary city. For example, San Francisco is a very strong sanctuary city. It does not comply with federal government or ICE in terms of coming in and arresting or deportations. Sergio and I are doing a project in San Antonio right now, and San Antonio doesn't call itself a sanctuary city, but it applies some of the sanctuary city rules and laws in terms of not complying with enforcement, ICE and the federal government. So some cities are stronger than others in terms of how they become a sanctuary city and how they work or don't work with the federal government. So it varies from place to place. The Sanctuary City Project started as a research project, and this is going to kind of dovetail into what I want to talk about today with design thinking and how that can implement into a project. We did a lot of research starting in 2008, utilizing secondary and primary research tools, secondary being more books, periodicals, newspapers, and primary being on the ground, talking with people, talking with nonprofits, talking with people in the community, talking with undocumented immigrants, talking with a lot of different people to feel a pulse of what was happening at the moment for sanctuary cities, specifically in the Bay Area in 2008. At that time, there was a lot of pushback on sanctuary cities in 2008. There was a murder, an undocumented immigrant killed another man in San Francisco. And that was used by some people as a rallying cry to stop the sanctuary city ordinance and to take away money and funding for that. And so at that time, it was a pretty hotly contested issue. At that time in 2008, we were seeing raids where ICE was going into people's homes and taking out undocumented immigrants and then deporting them. So San Francisco was not necessarily complying, but the raids were happening. And I want to stress that point that even though some places can be sanctuary cities, raids and federal involvement can still happen. It doesn't necessarily mean that the city police will help with that, but sometimes they necessarily can't stop it. And so we were seeing at that time more raids and the sanctuary ordinance coming under fire. So Sergio and I put together a presentation with a couple other artists in the Mission in 2009. It had our research displayed in there. It also had some sculptural elements, some video elements. It was participatory. And from there, we did projections onto walls in the city. We did food-based projects where we were talking about food as a symbol of where people come from and how they relate with each other and family. Moving up to about 2017. So I'm kind of fast forwarding a little, but this is kind of where we are now and how it relates to the project. In 2017, we got a show with Your Buena Center for the Arts, and we decided to start printmaking, utilizing printmaking and silkscreening in particular as a tool for us to start conversation surrounding sanctuary cities and immigration policy. So I'll explain it really quickly. We had a timeline on the wall of the museum going from 1989 when San Francisco became a sanctuary city to, at that time, 2017. And we dealt with policy, federal policy, city policy, raids and deportations, and then also miscellaneous information that people could add the wall to. So it was this large wall, 1989, with the numbers and text going up and down, showing people the different types of policies and city policies and raids and deportations that have been happening over the last 20-something years, right? That was kind of the primer for people to start to gain in a deeper conversation with us on some of what was happening, right? Inside the gallery, so we had the timeline, and then we had 3 separate tables where we had silk screens where we could make posters. And what we do is we take ink, we take a squeegee, we run it through the poster, and you can walk away with your own poster. The poster content was made up of questions we were asking our participants who came into the museum, asking them, what is a sanctuary? What would you tell an immigrant? Have you seen a deportation? We had 5 distinct questions. People would write their responses on the questions, and then we'd take some responses that we thought were powerful, and we turned those into posters. So the end result was people looking at the timeline, coming in, learning about a little more about sanctuary cities and immigration policy, deciding to make a poster based off a quote like "I am an immigrant" was one of them. "This is a sanctuary" was another. We had 10 different answers at that point where people could make a poster and then walk away with a poster and put it up in their community. So that was a really powerful tool for us. It was powerful because people were interested in making art. People were interested in silk screening. People were also interested in learning about sanctuary cities and immigration policy. And a lot of people in San Francisco at that time didn't even realize that we were a sanctuary city. So it was a really good moment to like start deeper conversation on some of these policies, using silk screening as a really participatory way to get people interested and engaged. So from there, it's kind of blown up. Donald Trump is president, and a lot of institutions and cities and nonprofits are interested in what we were doing. And so we've been traveling it all around the country. We also have a bicycle that we use that we can print make in public. So we actually ride the bike into public space, and we continue conversation with the public there. We also utilize billboards. We're making mobile billboards. We also utilize banners that you see on like the sides of a telephone pole. The billboards and the banners are content from the posters that we made from people's voices. To this point, we have over 35 unique posters that people have shared their responses with us, and we've turned them into posters. So the 35 posters are what we use to spread the message out, to get the conversation going, and to get people to tell us their experiences and what they feel about immigration, which then turns into other posters and goes into our archive. At this point, the archive is extremely important to us. We have over 2,000 unique responses from people across the country talking about sanctuary and immigration policy. And like I said, we have 35 posters and now countless banners and billboards. And those are our tools. That's where we are right now. We're working with you all at MCLA in Massachusetts, and like I said, San Antonio, and a bunch of shows coming up this year. During COVID, it's been really challenging on how to reach people, on how to talk with people. And we're utilizing a phone number now with MCLA and San Antonio that you can call in and answer a question that the public gave us many years ago. One was, what would you tell an immigrant? And the question is, when did you forget you were an immigrant? And I'll talk about those questions after in the phone number just to get you guys interested. But I want to move directions into how this project thinks about design thinking and community engaged thinking as a way to set up platforms for people to interact with us. And we hope to make equitable and fair art, okay? So design thinking, some people might not necessarily think that's part of the art practice. We consider ourselves fine artists, right? And for me, I teach at California College of the Arts. I've been teaching there for 7 years now. And I teach design thinking with my own fine art practice, different elements of design thinking for my students to come up with projects that are, as I said before, equitable, fair, thoughtful, thinking about community in a really equitable way. A lot of times you see these large scale community projects that people just pop in and do their project and then leave, and there's really no input from the community whatsoever. It's just, I put my work up and then I'm gone. I'm not necessarily interested in that, and this project is not interested in that. We're interested in more long-term engagement where we can start conversation. We can go to a nonprofit and meet with constituents. We can meet with you all at MCLA, the different students that we're working with. We want to have more of a long-term presence and not be this pop-in, pop-out presence that just kind of does what we do and then leaves. That's kind of what we're thinking with the billboards and all the posters that we're going to be sharing with you all over the next year. And so design thinking is a big part of that. What I want to do is, that's a quick overview. What I want to do is I want to show you a real quick PowerPoint on design thinking. And then it's going to follow into some work from our project, from the Sanctuary City Project, that you all can take a look at it. And I'll show you how we thought about design thinking within that, okay? So I'm going to share my screen really fast. Let me go to screen, start broadcast. Just 2 seconds. So let me know if you can see the screen when it comes up. Can you see it? Anybody?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, great. Thank you. So right off the bat, I noticed I have a typo in community, and I'm really sorry about that. I hate typos, and it's like staring me in the face right now as I show you this. So yes, there is a typo, but I started with community engagement and design thinking. So I talked about community engagement a bit. It's us going out there, working with people, working with community. Notice I use the word with. I really mean that. It's us going out there and listening, right? Engaging and actively listening to what community tells us to come up with a project. And design thinking has some strategies within it that utilizes interviewing and listening skills as a way to come up with an equitable and socially safe project that thinks about community for its basis, okay? So in a lot of ways, I think of it as a community engagement / design thinking to come up with a large scale project within community. The overview is first understanding your project. What are you doing? What's your goals? What's your project? What's the theme for your project? For us, it was sanctuary cities and immigration policy, right? So we had to understand what that was. We had to understand our community. Who is the audience that is thinking about sanctuary city policy, is thinking about immigration policy? Who is directly affected by that, and who are the major players? So the first step is to, what are we doing? What is our big idea? And then who is the community we're reaching out to, and how do we reach them, right? From there, we gather information. We gather both primary and secondary research, which I'll talk about in a second. And what we do is we synthesize into our project, into our concept. When we first started working on this project in 2008, it was all based off research at first. We had no idea what the final look was going to be. All we knew was we wanted to do hard research to come up to understand our project, to understand the community. And then from there, we would synthesize our information, our research into a project. And for that, for us, it was a timeline, it was pieces of sculpture, it was video work, and that first installation. And then number 4, design and iteration. Once you have your concept and your project, how it's going to look in mind, you start to build, you prototype, you iterate on your project. Whenever I do a project, I always like to bring it out into the public where it's going to be living. And I ask people questions. What do you think about it? We test the project, we prototype, and we iterate. And I think that's extremely important because getting it right the first time doesn't necessarily happen. So what I do when I'm thinking about design thinking frameworks and community engagement frameworks is I take these 4 little pillars and I put those into a project to realize something larger on a community scale, okay? So let me explain them each part better. So phase 1, understanding the project. Preliminary research for the project theme, utilizing primary and secondary research methods for the project theme, and start big and funnel down. What are the big questions you have? So again, preliminary research for the project. When we started with Sanctuary City Project, we utilized primary and secondary research, right? Secondary research, again, is using periodicals, newspapers, books, stuff, think tanks, information you can find online to start building out your understanding of the project. For us, for Sanctuary City Project, we were looking at articles from the Pew Research Center. We were looking at articles from the Migration Policy Institute. We were looking at the New York Times. We were looking at local newspapers. We did a deep dive into secondary research, looking at the different types of scholarly information we could find to start building out our project. From there, we went to primary research, which is talking with community, talking with nonprofits. For the Sanctuary City Project, we worked with over 42 different nonprofits in the Bay Area to interview people that work there, to interview constituents. We talked with people on the street. We talked with people from city government. We talked to San Francisco and Oakland city government. That started to round out the sanctuary policy and immigration policy in our mind in a really big way. And it really started to form the project. Once we did this primary and secondary research, which I won't lie to you, took about a year, we started to funnel down. What are the things that we're interested in? What questions do we have from here? And how does this start to form our own project, our own Sanctuary City project, okay? At the same time, we're trying to understand our community. This is the second phase, but kind of happens during the first phase. We're understanding trying to understand our key audience. Who is our key audience? What are the places and organizations that are working with, let's say, immigration policy or Sanctuary City policy? We're developing engagement strategies with communities and partners, and we're asking important questions based off research. So again, understanding the community is understanding who we're working with, who's our audience, and how do we ask direct questions and appropriate questions to help kind of bold out and understand what we're looking at with Sanctuary City policy and immigration policy in that time, the Bay Area. We're still doing this to today. We're still going to different think tanks. We're still going to different government organizations to talk about these issues and to understand the Sanctuary City policy and immigration deeper, right? And so these 2 parts of the process never stop. For MCLA, I'm going to be giving you all a digital timeline that's going to go into our show that we're doing. That's going to have all this research that we've been doing over the past 12 years. And you'll see what I mean by that, just kind of the different articles and interviews and everything we've done. So the first 2 phases, primary, secondary research, that then starts to get you into how to bring this to fruition. And remember, this is all part of design thinking. Design thinking is a framework that helps us integrate design, for example, or integrate work that listens to people, that listens to community, and that takes in that findings and brings it into a project. So design thinking, in a lot of ways, is making design based off people's feedback, people's inputs, people's wants and desires, right? And so I'm utilizing this as a way to bring up fine arts projects into this model, right? And so we're just kind of picking and choosing different things from design thinking into a fine arts model. So 3, synthesis to concept, analyze and synthesize findings from research, interviews and engagement tactics, integrate your creative practice, and brainstorm and develop outcomes for your final project. So design thinking is all about brainstorming and coming up with different ways to come up with a project. And I utilize those tactics as well. But first and foremost, I have to take what I learned in my research and bring it into my creative practice. At that time, for Sergio and I, we were doing video projects. We were doing We were doing a lot of projections. We were doing installation. And so our creative practice at that time were these fine arts tactics. And so once we got the research, once we started to put our heads around what we were looking at and what we were working with sanctuary cities and immigration policy, we started to bring that into our own creative practice, and we created an installation at the gallery in San Francisco in 2009. Fast forward to 2017, when I was talking about doing silk screens, I was doing a ton of silk screening at that time and utilizing it as a way to talk with people and to be creative in the community. And so we utilized that creative practice, silk screening, in 2017, to which we're still using today. And so it's all about taking the information and then how do you bring it into your own practice, into your own project. After we knew that in 2017 we would do silk screening, we really brainstormed how we wanted to do it. We brainstormed, okay, if people answer a certain question, we can take information from that question and then put it into our own poster that people can take away and put out into the community. And so once we got that process down, we knew that we could be successful in terms of talking to primary people, getting research that way, developing out new artwork that then can go out into the community and furthering conversation based around sanctuary cities immigration policy. And it really has worked. For the last 4 years, we've given out thousands and thousands of posters all over the world. And we have them up all over the country. We've seen them in different places all over the world. And so we've been lucky to get the information and the project out through the act of our creative practice, which is a real simple way for silk screening, right? So once you synthesize these ideas as a concept, the last thing is design, iteration, and distribution, right? So we created prototypes and we shared with our community and collaborators. We iterated on our prototypes, we executed our final project and implemented the community. So to make sense of that, we prototyped the design of our posters. We got information from our research from people's voices, and we prototyped what that would look like, how that would sit on a poster, and how we could get that out into community and share the information from the research and share people's voices. We iterated on prototypes for sure. We had a couple different iterations of our first initial posters that we didn't necessarily feel worked. Some had background images and it was just too busy. And so we realized like the easiest way, and I think the most successful way to do this, was to just put pure text onto our screens. And I'll show you what that looks like when we go into the pieces. But so we prototyped into our final poster design, which you'll see today. We executed on the final project. And for that time, it was the YBCA, Yearbook Running for the Center for the Art Show, which included the bike and included the posters and included getting it out in the community. And so through the process of research, through the process of understanding who we're working with and understanding our audience, prototyping, brainstorming, we came up with a project that uses design thinking strategies and fine arts strategies to come up with a long-term project that we can get out, hopefully in an ethical way and a successful way in getting out messaging surrounding sanctuary cities and immigration policy. So that's kind of the framework I work with, okay? It's really thinking about taking away design thinking elements, which are all in these 4 overviews: understanding the project, understanding the community, synthesis of concept, and design iteration. Design thinking utilizes all of these small little elements that I brought up in these 4 points. And I'm just kind of mashing those up with fine arts practice and thinking about how we can come up with projects in that regard. So for this project that I'm doing with you all for the next couple weeks, we're going to think about different design thinking strategies and combine them with fine art strategies to come up with a series of posters that you all are going to produce. And we can talk about that a little further later, but that's kind of where we're going with this part. So as I look at the time, I'm running a little high. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through these different images that I want to show you, and I'll talk about how design thinking came into play with this. So this was at a Jewish Contemporary Center in San Francisco. This is made out of vinyl, and it's quite large. I think it was about 20 feet long by about 6 feet high. As you can read, it says, "Sanctuary is a home away from home." That phrase came from one of the viewers, one of the participants from the original print shop. So we made a screen from that viewer's response. "A sanctuary is a home away from home." We had a large conversation with that viewer, actually, talking about his experience with sanctuary cities and what that meant. He was an immigrant himself, and what that meant for him as an immigrant, and what that meant for his experience coming to the US, I think it was like 12 years ago. So how did that duality of being a home is where you came from. And then of course, this new home being the United States. And so he was kind of struggling and thinking about that dichotomy. And so that's where that phrase came from. As I said, that's vinyl, and what we do vinyl muraling as well. And so we put that up in the space and allowed for people to come in, take in the phrase, and then learn more based off our research that was available at the center. So again, utilizing that research to deepen the conversation. This was the original Yerba Buena Center for the Arts 2017 Sanctuary City project. This is the print shop. As you can see, the bicycle is right there in the front. We do printmaking on the bicycle in the street. The reason for that is to do more research, to talk with people, to share the information. And it also gets it out of the museum or gallery space, which brings it into a more, I would say, less intimidating space. And so I like going out into the streets because we get just a larger diversity of participation with the audience. In the back, you can see the timeline. That's the timeline that we had. In the front, we have 3 different symbols on the windows. One is a table, one is a bed, and one is a pew. And sanctuary cities started back in 1989 at actual Catholic churches were utilizing sanctuary cities or sanctuary spaces. So undocumented immigrants could stay at, let's say, a church and be free of fear of being, deported or interference with the federal government. And so the tables that we made for our original silk screens could be turned into a bed, a pew, and a table. The table we'd silk screen on, and the bed and the pew were more of a symbol of the original sanctuary city spaces that were used for undocumented immigrants starting in 1989. There's the timeline right there. And as you can see, the 3 tables, and you can see the right of that pillar, there's one of our silk screens. So the information is on the top. We have deportations, we have policy, and then the tables, people could silk screen on them. There's the drawing rack to the right, and then we had sanctuary city written in 4 different languages on the pole. So this was our interactive space, and Sergio and I worked there 2 days a week, working with people and talking about the immigration policy and printing posters and putting them out into the public. Again, more research for us. Every time we'd encounter somebody, we'd learn something new. We would write it down. They would give us the information. And people were also allowed to add to the timeline, which they did in their own information to the timeline. This is some of the responses. What would you do if you saw an ICE raid? This is our primary research right there. These were people, we had like 500 responses in the first month, and people would give us these responses, and we would take some of those and then synthesize our information and turn those into our own posters. So we were getting all sorts of different types of responses based off the 5 questions we asked. This was a really wonderful child. That's the postering right there. That's one of the original 10 posters, undocumented, unafraid. People were adding to the piece as well to make it their own. The whole layout is also thinking about, as you'll see, a lot of the phrases are broken up. We wanted people to stop and have to pay attention to the phrasing a little more than just like reading it if it was just normally written. And we wanted to make it feel a little foreign as well, make it feel a little different. And so we utilized breaking up the pieces into a rhythm that we thought was successful, that would then make people think about it, maybe stay with it a little longer and make it feel a little foreign to them. That's the printmaking process over on the right-hand side. That poster below, the silk screen saying free to leave. From there, we started wheat pasting walls. There's the bicycle in the front. As you can see, there's another silk screen on the bottom left-hand side. It says sanctuary is a quiet place. That was another response we learned from our participants. All of these responses on this wall were from our participants, and we set up the bike. We wheat pasted this wall in 8 hours. It took us a whole day. It was over 200 posters, and we literally wheat pasted the whole thing. At the same time, people were stopping and talking with us. We were silk screening with them, and we were gathering more responses from people that we could then turn into other posters and add to our archive of responses that we received. So what you can see is we're constantly growing our archive. We're constantly gathering responses, and we're constantly talking with people to gather a deeper understanding of how people are thinking about, interacting with, or day-to-day lives with sanctuary policy and immigration topics. So that whole wall was covered. That's the final result right there. What we did was in the middle of the wall, we had a pen that hung down, and people started to write responses in the community responding to the posters. And we got some really interesting responses to that. So we have many different interactive ways that we're trying to get people to respond to us and then take photographs of and archive so that we can then make more posters and add to our research. This was in San Diego, at the Museum of Contemporary Art there. Again, we're using vinyl postering on the outside of the window. This shot into the street, so people from the street in downtown San Diego could see this vinyl, these vinyl posters. And it so happened somebody ended up defacing this piece. They ended up scraping the vinyl off, which has happened. You know, this is, as you can tell in the country right now, this is a very heated topic, and some people react very strongly to it. And so our project is here to shine a light on what's happening right now from 1989 to now. And we're putting this information out there, and we're going to get pushback. We get pushback every time we do this project. And we want to share dialogue. We want to get in dialogue with these people that want to deface our project, or want to call us idiots, or want to call us what they will. And we do have these conversations, and sometimes they go very strongly, and sometimes we have an intelligent conversation that can be positive. And so it's part of the project. We have positive and negative feedback. This was San Diego. We turned our timeline into a digital timeline that you'll see at MCLA later this year. And these are some more of the posters. The country of the immigrant is here. I am a refugee. I am free to leave. A kid was deported yesterday. Detaining immigrants, immigrant kids is $1 billion industry. Why did you come here? That's just and again, that's about half of what we have right now. We have about 16 to 18 more. There's Sergio, who you'll meet in the next couple of weeks, printing with students. We've worked with high school students. We've worked with college students. We've worked with elementary students. We've worked with nonprofits, museums, galleries, a lot of different people. This is us wheat pasting some of the posters in an alley in San Diego. This is the bicycle outside, where again, we're archiving, we're bringing in information from people interacting with us, and we're creating posters. This is me at La Cocina. It's a festival in San Francisco, and we're again working with people printing, taking home posters and putting them up in the public. We kind of do these rogue vinyl billboards now as well. So that says, obviously, this is a sanctuary over a California Republic postering campaign that the state is doing. We've been putting up different phrasing all over these California Republic postering for the past year or so. This is one of them. This is about, I want to say about 10 feet by 4 feet. This is an example of a banner. The country of the immigrant is here. We put this on the side of a building that supports Sanctuary City's immigration policy. This is off a very busy road in Oakland, California, and was up for about a year. We like the banners because, you know, they're very visible. They really enlarge what we're trying to say, the words we're trying to say, and it's a successful tool for us. These are some banners, some murals that we've done with vinyl. Expanding out the vinyl into large scale. There's the bike. And then this was some work we did with the census. So this is my email right here if any of the students want to email me. As I said, we also do billboards too. And why we're doing these billboards and banners is to really kind of highlight the words, blow up the words, illuminate the words, get them out into public spaces. And we like to use these advertising platforms, these ways that people advertise, to bring out people's voices and what they've told us through working with us on this project, through sharing with us in this project. And so we're taking a larger scale now. We're moving this to a large scale, still doing posters, but moving it to a large scale to really get more eyes and more voices involved. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to come back to the screen. How are we doing time-wise?
It's only 3:10.
Yeah, we're good. So we have probably at least like 35 minutes, right? For a 75-minute class. Yeah.
I was
Okay,
reading
good.
the clock.
I felt like I was talking a lot there. I tend to talk quick. And is there any questions so far in terms of what I showed you? Do we want to go over the idea of design thinking again? Let me stop there. Any questions?
What other parts of the country have you done your print work?
Yeah, so great question. We've done it all over the Bay Area, of course, leading down into San Jose. We've done projects in LA, Los Angeles. We've done projects in San Diego. We've done projects in Tijuana. We've done projects in Seattle. We're doing a project in San Antonio. We're doing a project in Massachusetts. We've had work in New York City. We've had work in Arizona. And there's conversations with some people in Michigan to work with University of Michigan, and there was some conversation for people in Toronto who were interested in the project. So that's what we a couple conversations right now, but those are who we've been working with. And how we do it is, before COVID, we were bringing out the print shop. We were literally shipping the print shop to different locations and having people set up the shop, and then having people come to the spaces, whether it's museum or gallery, in print. So this is an open platform for us. This goes with design thinking as well. Design thinking really thinks about how we can open up these types of ways of thinking and these different platforms to allow people to make their own use of it, make with it what they will, and make their own projects with it. So we wanted the print shop to be able to travel to different places without us there and have people take it over, print, make it into what they want to make it into. We'll give you the tables, we'll give you the screens, you burn some more screens. In Seattle, we worked with Seattle University up there, and the students burned their own screens and started a campaign up there with some of the issues they were interested in. In San Diego, the docents at the museum, the people working there, they took over the print shop, and we came back 3 months after the show opened, and the docents were running the shop beautifully. They were talking about immigration and sanctuary policy. They were talking about the research, and they were creating posters with the public. So we're looking at this as a way to travel to different places and kind of live on its own. We'll show up when we can, just because of just travel and time and stuff. But we want it to be a living document that people can use. So then of course we archive everything. So the archive just keeps growing and growing and growing. So yeah, we've traveled quite a bit with it so far. Other questions? Did the design thinking make sense in terms of how it kind of relates back to the fine art process?
Chris, can I jump in and ask a question?
Yes, please.
We're talking a lot about archives and how archives are created, and the limitations of archives and what that leaves us as historians. And I wondered if you could speak a little bit about your archival process and where you'd like your archive ultimately to end up, and that process as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's something that we're working with right now as well. So we do have a website, sanctuarycityproject.com. And so a lot of the information and research we've done ends up on that, but that's not good enough. As I said, we have over 2,000 of those unique responses, and we're in the process right now of scanning those and documenting those so that we can use them in some sort, we're not necessarily sure how it's going to come out, whether that is a book of some sort, or lives on the website, or gets distributed in some regard. One of the first ways that we did our archive was we made it into it was about a 30 by 40 inch poster. So imagine a 30 by 40 inch poster, double-sided. It was quite large, that had our research on one side, research on the other side, and we designed it to fold into a small book that was about 8 by 12 inches. And what you could do is you could unfold it and just basically take in the information, take in the research, take in the feedback we'd been getting for the last couple of years when we started doing the initial research. We took those posters, we did a huge print run of it, and we gave it to the 42 different nonprofits we were working with in the Bay Area. And those nonprofits then distributed the posters to constituents themselves. We also gave some to the SF city government, and we distributed these booklets, I'll call them for lack of a better word, out into the public. And that was a good way of kind of sharing the archive. But our archive has gotten so huge at this point. We don't necessarily know what it's going to look like, but we are documenting and archiving right now, or documenting and scanning. So I'll get back to you on that one. I'd love to hear your ideas on it, because it can be a challenge for sure.
Thanks.
The idea of like doing research can sound maybe a little boring or a little mundane. You know, it's our passion. And I think it's so important to stress knowing your topic, knowing your community, knowing who you're working with, and really doing your due diligence to understand that. You know, if we didn't do our research and we just started talking about sanctuary cities, just like, yeah, you know, I know what a sanctuary city is. I know it's, you know, lack of federal involvement. You know, and I couldn't really go much deeper than that. You know, the project wouldn't have the depth or hopefully the impact it has when we can share this type of information with people and hopefully deeper their understanding. And so it all kind of revolves around this research. And that's why I feel so strongly, and I teach my students the idea of design thinking as a way to, you know, utilize some of that methodology to then bring into your own practice, into your own projects. I shared with you, one of the homework assignments you're gonna have is some reading. And IDEO, I'm sure some of you have heard of IDEO, but they have really been on the forefront of setting up these toolkits on how to think about design thinking and how to think about human-centered design, which is another kind of element of design thinking. I shared with you that one of the design kits that they put together online, and I'd like you to look through that, you know, over this next week. The design kit's really interesting. It breaks down the different types of ways that design thinking is frameworked. It talks about primary and secondary research. It talks about different ways to brainstorm before you're coming up with your final project. It talks about how to document a project. It talks about listening, right? And empathetic listening. I think listening is so important in these projects, in thinking about how to design a project and thinking about how to work with community. And when you're going to be conducting some primary interviews next week. And I really want to, you know, next week we'll really talk about listening a lot and being able to conduct an interview that is, you're present, you're there, and you're kind of taking some of the research you've learned and then really like letting people tell you a story, letting people share with you in a really successful way. And I think design thinking really thinks about that quite a bit. And so when you get into that design kit, you'll see some strategies based on that. Like I said, I don't use everything in design thinking framework. I just pick and choose which makes sense for my own fine art practice. And that's what I'm proposing for us all here. And to give you the guideline, the time frame, we're going to do first the primary and secondary research. Second, we're going to do some interviews, right? We're going to talk with some people. We're going to talk to somebody you know and somebody you don't know. You're going to get articles together. You're going to talk with some people and do some interviews, and that's going to be our primer. Third, we're going to start to think about how to design a poster onto a piece of paper. How do we do layout? What do we want to have on there? How do we mix visual image with text, right? For our posters, we're purely using text, and that's a conscious decision that we use. But we'll talk about how we use the design process to lay out a message on a piece of paper and make it successfully. And then fourth, we'll make the posters, you know? So we'll actually physically create the posters and utilize those to bring out into the public, right? We could make, you know, the nice thing about poster making is you can make it really quickly. It doesn't take long to do. You can make multiples fast, and you can place them out in community. You could place them on your wall. You could give them to a friend. You could give them to your parents. It doesn't matter where it goes, but it gets messaging out there, and it highlights specific ideas and research that you and I will be doing over the next 4 weeks. So we're doing this in a really quick manner. But my goal is, I know Melanie's goal too, is for you all to think about how this process can touch some of your projects, how this process can be implemented into a community-based setting, right? I brought up ethical a lot, and I want to bring it up again, and I really want to stress this. It's like when you're working with community, being mindful that like I'm an outsider sometimes. If it's not my community, I'm an outsider. I'm here to listen. I'm here to learn. I'm here to take away from you. And that's why primary research is so important, right? We utilize the bike as a research tool. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to be you like out there with a microphone or a recorder or a phone. I use the bike as a way to draw people in, right? I use a bike as a way to get people curious on what I'm doing. We'll make a poster and I can learn from them. I listen to them, and then that's part of the research I'm doing. And, you know, I think one of the important things about making posters and giving away posters is there's an equitable exchange happening, right? Whenever you tell me a piece of information, whether it's in the gallery or in the museum or in the street, Sergio and I always want to give you something back. And what that could be is the poster. It could be an actual original piece of art that you've created. It could be a conversation surrounding maybe something you didn't know or something you were curious about regarding sanctuary city policy and immigration policy. But it's an equitable exchange. It's a mutually beneficial exchange, we hope. And we really strive to do that. And I think that design thinking projects and human-centered design thinking projects really think about that in a positive way. They talk about equity, they talk about diversity, and they talk about inclusivity. And we're striving to do that with our projects. And I think design thinking is a good model to look at to bring that into your own projects. So
Chris, for my students, for next week, they are going to do some secondary research. They're looking for 3 different articles.
Yeah.
And I have a particular assignment. I have a guide through our library that goes directly into some resources for immigration. And so what I have for them is to be thinking about the 2 questions. When did you forget you were an immigrant? And what would you say to an immigrant? And to use those as their starting points, as trying to do some free writing about what comes up for them, and then using that as a way to figure out what are their research terms, and to find 3 articles or books or something, and to read those to start to inform them what their particular interest is related to their answers to that question. What would you add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, let me talk about secondary sources first.
Yep.
I want you to be critical on secondary sources, okay? There's a lot of misinformation in the world out here. The internet, as we all know, can spread that. So I'm looking to corroborate sources sometimes. I look at, let's say, the New York Times. I look at reputable magazines or newspaper organizations. I look at local news as well. But I'm also, if I find an article, I'm also trying to corroborate it with another article or look at the sources or where the source material is coming from. I also like to look at think tanks, right? So a couple different think tanks I want you to think about or maybe take a look at is, one is the Pew Research Center. It's spelled P-E-W, Research Center. And they're doing amazing work based off data sets, but also primary and secondary research that they've gathered over the course of how many years, forever. Not only on immigration policy, but a lot of different issues as well. But I'd love you to take a look at that and navigate that site and see what you find. And also the Migration Policy Institute is doing some really interesting research as well. And I look at them a lot too to kind of corroborate information that I'm finding and making sure that some of these articles are legit. It's coming from a place of truth. Because like I said, you can find some things that could be misconstrued or over exaggerated, and at this day and age, it can be hard sometimes to see that or to understand that. So I want you to think about different think tanks and articles and be critical when you're looking at them, right? Think about, does this sound correct? Or maybe I should take another, let me take another look and see if I can find something to corroborate that and back it up, But secondary research as well, I encourage you to see what's happening in the Berkshires, right? See what's happening in Western Massachusetts right now in terms of sanctuary city policy and immigration policy. See what's happening in Massachusetts, see what's happening in the Northeast, and then start going out from there to national policy. On national policy, you're going to find a ton of stuff on Trump. Every day something new is happening, right? I mean, every day my research is growing. But you'll find a lot of more nuanced and interesting things, I think, in your own cities and regions as well that you might not have got necessarily by watching, let's say, a CNN or something like that, right? So I encourage you to look locally, look regionally, but also look nationally. I mean, there's a lot of important information, not only happening with DACA right now, but also on the border, with the border wall. A lot of the COVID policy that Trump has been implementing is, I think, flat out racist and dangerous. And so, take a look, really try to think, think locally, then go broadly, And finally, I want to address those 2 questions. What would you tell an immigrant? And when did you forget you were an immigrant? We've used these 2 questions often. When did you forget you were an immigrant came from a student we were working with in Seattle. And what she was saying was, there's history, there's generations of immigration into the United States of America that's happened. It is still happening now, right? And so unless you're Native American, there's a good chance that you're somewhere, your lineage is coming from another part of the world into this country. And so we want people to think about that with when did you forget you were an immigrant, right? There's a thing called assimilation in this country. And, you know, back in the teens and 20s, you had Irish and Italian coming in, then through different waves of immigration up till now, where you have Latinx and you have Middle Eastern immigration coming into the country. You know, there's different waves that have happened. And so we want people to think about that. We want to think about when did you forget that happened and when did you forget you're an immigrant and what does that mean, you know? And so what would you tell an immigrant? The same thing, thinking about what you've learned from just this conversation today, or thinking about what you've heard on the news or the research you're going to be doing in the next week or two. What would you tell somebody who's experiencing this? And remembering that at some point, maybe one of your relatives or somebody that it was in your family was an immigrant as well. My grandparents are immigrants, and so I like to talk to them when they were alive about their experience and what that meant to them and what that looked like for them. Sergio De La Torre, my partner, he's from Tijuana. He has conversations with his family, with his friends about this. And yeah, you know, there's a wealth of information within that. And so we really want you to think about those two questions as a framework. And my final pitch is we have this phone number that we'll share with you. And we want people to call in. Our archive is going to grow this time by people calling into this number and sharing their voice and sharing their response with that. And that's going to be our fuel for the next round of posters that we're going to be making. So we want you to really think about these questions. You don't need to answer it now, but I love what Melanie's saying about brainstorming and writing about your responses to these. And at some point we'll talk about calling into the number and sharing your response. Yeah.
I think at this point, Chris, unless there's any final questions or anything like that, I'd like to take my students and walk them through what they need to do for next week. And I don't know, Catherine, if you have the same thing to do, but maybe we can end it here, at least end your part here, and then we can kind of split to where we need to go from here.
That sounds perfect. Thank you so much, Chris. This has been excellent.
Could I say just one last thing?
Yeah.
I just want to say thank you all for listening and for giving me an hour of your time. I really appreciate it. I know everybody's really busy, and I'm really looking forward to working with you all and hearing your responses. And I really wish I could be there with you all to meet everybody, but this is the new way we have to do things. But thank you so much for letting me talk for an hour. Thank you for being here with us. We look forward to spending the next 4 weeks with you, well, 3 weeks after today. And I know I've learned a lot, and I'm super excited to see where this is going to lead all of us. I know that when I think about, already what I'm thinking when I think about immigration is expanded, and I'm sure the same is for everyone. So thank you, and I look forward to seeing you next week. And my students, you can stay on the call, and yes, Catherine, I'll let me
add to our thanks. This has been wonderful for us, and we'll look forward to seeing the posters and calling in and participating in our own way as we go forward. So those of you in art history, we will log off of this call and then log back onto our regular Zoom number. So I will see you all in a few minutes on the other Zoom. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thanks.